Hey everyone, this is Bo. Over the past couple weeks, I've been working on these barn doors for a friend of ours. They are completely made from pine. They measure about 92 inches by 36 inches wide. Together, they'll be used to conceal off a bedroom with a very large door. And in the center, there's a rabbet on the opposing doors, so when they are shut, there's no seam in between. There's a little bit of privacy in the center of the door. They are mortise and tenon joints on all the corners and this center rail here. The panels are tongue and groove. The gaps and allowing for seasonal movement are accomplished with some 1/4-inch space balls between everything. The diagonal braces are purely for decoration. They are not structural. These doors will be hanging from a rail and not on a hinge. So these are just screwed in place with some elongated holes and then plugged off to cover up the screw. They were finished with General Finishes brown mahogany and rosewood mixed together to get the desired look, which matches the doors in the person's house. Let's see here. I put together a few videos, just outlining the progress from milling to mortising, assembly, and then finishing. So I hope you enjoy them. Thanks. All right, so let's get started here. I start by skip planing these long pieces of pine, which will be the vertical rails and the horizontal rails that make up the door structure. All this pine I bought from Home Depot. Probably could have got them cheaper at an actual hardwood dealer, but this was very convenient, close by. Took me quite a while to dig through the stacks and find boards that weren't severely, cupped or warped or twisted, but I ended up finding quite a few good ones. Quite a few 1x6s and then a bunch of 1x8s. After I was done skip planing everything, I had to make some laminations. So the structural members of the door are made up of two boards clamped or glued together. And you can see I think I'm doing looks like 3 laminations in this clamp up here. So 6 boards total. I did make quite a large mess of my garage floor by doing this, but I ended up getting them all clamped together here. I then moved this to my bench, and then did another glue up on the floor to do all the boards. So here I'm cutting down all the boards that will eventually get the tongue and groove and be the what I'll call the internal parts of the door, like the field boards. Just cutting them in half to rough length at this point in time. One of the things I do want to point out is my dust collection for my chop saw. What you can see is it's just one of those plastic big gulp hoods, and it has a 4-inch line going to it, and this actually does a surprisingly good job to capture all the dust off the miter saw. One of these days I'll get around to making a dedicated miter saw rolling workstation that'll have that big gulp thing integrated into it, but it does work pretty well. As you can see here, I'm skip planing the boards that will eventually get the tongue groove, and you can see in the background the laminations that are still glued up on my garage floor. In the next shot here, I'll get to explaining the next steps after those come out of the clamps. But in the meantime, I can mill all this lumber up. So I've just finished scraping off all the glue from the laminations. I didn't get all of it off, but I want to get a majority of it off before I send it through the joiner. As you can see here, I have 2, 4, 6, 8 separate laminations put together. They represent the 2 vertical styles of the door, and then there's be 2 horizontal pieces. A third horizontal piece will be half of this, and then this is the second door here. So 2 vertical pieces, the 2 upper and lower horizontal pieces, and then the center horizontal piece. And then here on my far left is an extra piece just in case I screw something up. The laminations came together pretty well. I'd say my second glue up went much better than my first with that first round of practice. My spare here has a few gaps. The one edge here had a little gap in it, so that's why it's my spare. The next steps that I'm going to go through, I'm going to joint the faces, or the face, and then plane the opposite face, and then I'll joint the edge and rip them to width. You can see there's a lot of glue to scrape off from those laminations. It's kind of a messy process, and there's still some glue on my garage floor too I need to clean up. So next up, I'm going to move my jointer out from its usual location and get to the middle of the garage, since it's not since these pieces are so long, they require the entire garage width to joint them. I'm about ready to start jointing the faces of these long boards. You can see from my shop's about 19 foot wide. I have a cabinet on one end. This part of the board on this end is basically up against the door when it's on the in-feed side of the table. And as I'm going to pass this thing through here, it's going to just about get to this cabinet. Gets to about right there before after it comes through the blade. So it's a tight fit in my shop for sure, but it looks like I can accommodate it. So next step here, I'm going to start jointing the faces, and then I'll do the edges at the same time, and then onto planing and ripping. Most of these pieces only took a few passes per side to get flat. I think there was one that took probably 3 or 4 passes, and that was the one that at the end determined the final thickness after planing. It's helpful to plug in a planer if you want to plane wood. Pro tip. And once again, with the length of these boards, it's a pretty tight fit in my garage. The other direction as well, basically up against the garage door on the infeed side of the planer, and against the back wall on the outfeed side. The next step was to joint the edges. I did take this pretty slow. I wanted to make sure that that edge was very flat, very straight. And as well, I check for 90 quite often as well to make sure it's 90 degrees to the face along its entire length. That's to ensure that when I put the tenons into here, the face of that tenon meets up very well with the with those vertical boards. I also have to apply paraffin wax to the surface of the joiner bed quite a bit. That pine leaves a somewhat sticky surface after you run it through there a few times. So, and as well, I'm using a feather board to help keep some pressure against the infeed, the fence, the vertical fence on the infeed side, just to give me an extra hand. Next up, it's time to rip everything to width, at least all the laminations to width. Once again, you can see my shop's pretty much maxed out with these long boards. I had to move my bandsaw out of the way so the board could go all the way to the wall on the infeed of the table saw, and then as I push it through, it gets just about to my garage door on the outfeed side. And then again, you could probably catch there, I'm checking to make sure that edge is also 90 to the surface, just so the mortise and tenon joint mates up nice and there's no gaps and no twist in that door. And on the table saw, just like the joiner, I'm using a feather board to help keep that long piece against the fence, just acting as an extra hand, just because it's somewhat unmanageable with how long it is to keep pressure in all directions. After ripping all the pieces to the desired width, I now move on to cutting everything to length. First, I'm setting up my support on the left-hand side of the miter saw there, and here I'm gonna lay out and measure each board individually. I'd like to, it's nice to always be able to cut multiple boards at once. With how large these are, it's pretty hard to do. So I'm just gonna measure, mark, cut, repeat, and if one ends up a little bit longer than the others, I come back and just touch it up and make sure they're all the same length. These last few cuts are me just barely trimming off any material off the end just to make sure that all the boards are the same length. That's going to do it for the first video. I want to thank you for watching, and please stay tuned for my next video where I cut more of the joinery and get the initial dry fit of the door done.